Tonight's webinar. My name is Melanie McKinney, Programs Coordinator for CAN-DO Multiple Sclerosis. Thank you for acting on the belief that you are more than your MS by attending tonight's webinar, Yoga in MS, presented by Victoria Schweitzer, physical therapist and certified yoga instructor. CAN-DO MS is an innovative provider of lifestyle empowerment programs for people living with MS and their support partners. We empower people to move beyond their MS by giving them the knowledge, skills, tools, and confidence to adopt healthy lifestyle behaviors, actively co-manage their disease, and live their best lives. Please visit the CAN-DO MS website, www.mscando.org, where you can register for upcoming webinars and view our archived webinars. Check out our CAN-DO MS lifestyle empowerment programs, including our CAN-DO Take Charge, Jumpstart, and Jumpstart in Motion programs. You can share your CAN-DO promise, and you can learn ways you can contribute to or get involved with CAN-DO MS. Now, a few housekeeping items before we get started. Questions and comments will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We will answer as many questions as time allows. You can post your question by typing in the chat feature, which is located on the left of your computer screen. To submit a question, type in the small box that says Chat with Presenters. You can listen to the live webinar through your computer speakers rather than having to call in as well. And this presentation is being recorded, and it will be archived on CAN-DO MS's website. All of our webinars are archived on our website, and you can view them again at any time. You can also view the webinar schedule and register for upcoming webinars. And those of you who are attending live tonight, you'll receive an email with copies of this PowerPoint presentation along with another helpful resource. CAN-DO MS asks that you please submit your questions and comments in the chat box. We will get to as many as time allows, and please also complete the evaluation at the end of the webinar. We value everyone's feedback. And we have a fantastic speaker with us for tonight's webinar. Victoria is a physical therapist and a certified yoga teacher. Over the past 12 years, she has specialized in working with people with neurological disorders, and she has spent 4 years working in an MS clinic. Victoria is a multiple sclerosis certified specialist, and she's taught yoga classes specifically for people with MS. Victoria has been involved with CAN-DO MS as a team leader and adaptive yoga teacher since 2007, and she's also been a student of meditation. She's currently working as a physical therapist in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And before we get started, I have a quick survey up here, if you don't mind taking a second to answer so we can get a feel for who's on the webinar with us this evening. And it looks like those answers are filling in. Great, we've got quite a few people with MS and some healthcare professionals, which is fantastic. And thanks to support partners for being here as well. And with that, I will turn the slide deck over to Victoria. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mel.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Thank you, Mel. Thank you for everyone taking time out to attend this presentation. And it's a real honor to be presenting to you and being able to also reach so many people in this format. So our topic is yoga and MS. And I'd like to go over the overview of what we'll be discussing. So I will be talking about why exercise, which is more of a review. There are other webinars, I think, actually, that cover just this topic. What is yoga? The benefits and risks as well of yoga. I'll discuss some literature support and go through some tricky yoga definitions and also go through the different kinds of styles of yoga. We'll discuss some MS-specific concerns pertaining to yoga. We'll go through some slides about how you can actually choose a practice and how to build a program for yourself. There will be a resources slide to help you be able to navigate finding appropriate yoga resources, classes, DVDs, all that stuff in your area. And that'll be one of your handouts as well. And then we'll do a short practice because that's the best way to learn about yoga. It will be a breathing practice, so nothing too hard. And I'd like to start with an audience poll to see what people's level of experience is with yoga. So do you practice yoga? Never, one time only, 1 to 10 times, monthly, weekly, or daily? And we'll just take a moment to see what people's practices are. So it looks like there's just a few more coming in. I'll just wait another moment. So it looks like actually the largest group of people are people who have a regular weekly practice already, and then also almost equivalent a group of people who've never done yoga. So we have a real mix, and some who've just tried it, and actually a lot of people who've only tried it 1 to 10 times. So we have a real mix of all of the different categories. So why choose exercise when you have multiple sclerosis? And yoga is, of course, considered a form of exercise. Exercise is thought to have a neuroprotective effect, which means, so neuroprotective is that exercise serves to protect the central nervous system. The central nervous system includes the spinal cord, the brain, and the optic nerve. And so it protects the central nervous system from injury or degeneration to some extent. There are research studies that have looked at this, and it's been found that an insulin-like growth factor appears to act as a neuroprotective agent, and studies indicate that exercise could promote this factor in MS. And a brain-derived neurotrophic factor is increased in a part of the brain with physical activity, which may help lessen decline in cognitive function in MS. Higher physical fitness levels enhance cognitive and neuroplasticity in people with MS. So I'll just explain neuroplasticity. And it is the central nervous system's ability to reorganize itself by forming new connections throughout life. It allows compensation for injury and disease and remapping in response to injury. How to choose the exercise program which is right for you. So it's good to find something with all of these components: enjoyable, available, affordable, convenient, something that suits your lifestyle and your schedule. It's always a good way, if you've been inactive, to start low and build up slowly. Hold yourself accountable to your goals and your program, and reward yourself when you're reaching them. Here's a slide on some barriers to exercise which may come up for people who have MS. And I always say that it's a great idea, and I know it's promoted in the Can-Do programs as well, to, if you haven't been exercising and you're just starting to think about a program and you've chosen a mode that you like, say it's yoga, to come up with some obstacles, some personal obstacles in you going through with that program, and then come up with and jot down possible ways that you can overcome those obstacles. So components of an exercise program include stretching, strengthening, which also can include balance and coordination work, endurance, and relaxation. All of these components can be found in yoga, which makes yoga a very viable choice of exercise. And I'll switch gears now and more focus on yoga. So what is yoga? Yoga is a commonly practiced mind-body approach which has components of meditation, breathing, and postures. It comes from ancient India and is a branch of Ayurveda, which is the study of life. It's been practiced for thousands of years, and it's considered to be a science and an art. A well-rounded yoga class includes all those components of exercise that I spoke about. And yoga is a mode of exercise, and so similar guidelines for intensity and frequency are applicable. The word yoga means to join or to yoke, to bring together the mind, the body, and the spirit. The breath is used as a way to focus and link the mind to the body. Modern yoga is a form of exercise, not a religion, and the use of linking breath with movement is what makes yoga unique to other kinds of exercise. But there are other exercise programs or practices that are similar in that way. For example, Tai Chi or Qigong. And yoga's objective is to assist the practitioner in using the breath and body to foster an awareness of ourselves. It is about making balance and creating equanimity so as to live in peace, good health, and harmony with the greater whole. Yoga emphasizes relaxed movements, breathing, and conscious or deliberate exercise. And there are so many benefits to yoga. And research has been finding this more and more, so it can help improve strength, flexibility, posture. It can reduce spasticity or muscle tension, reduce fatigue and stress. It can help improve sleep, balance, coordination, lung capacity, concentration, and sense of well-being. From my own practice, I really have experienced some of these benefits myself. In particular, I used to have some trouble with sleeping, and I found when I started practicing yoga regularly and meditation more regularly, I personally felt like it helped those problems quite a lot, and just my overall sense of well-being. Some risks of yoga are the same risk of injury as with any other form of exercise. So it's very, very important to honor your body and your symptoms and the kind of day that you're having. There is a risk of fall, and so it's very important also to look at what your needs are if you have a history of falling to the floor or a history of balance problems, to make sure you take the right precautions, use the right supports. For example, you can bring your walking aid if you use one into the class and use it as a support. You can use a chair. You can hold on to the wall for standing poses. You can stay seated and do poses in a modified way. So it's very important to think about whether or not you're at risk for falls and how you can prevent that in a yoga class, and also speaking to your teacher about that. You can also, it's also important to speak to your health practitioner if you haven't exercised in a long time and you want to start a yoga practice or any kind of exercise, or if you have other conditions on top of MS that it might be a good idea to speak to a healthcare practitioner about. There's always the risk of overexertion and overheating, which will not make the disease progression of MS worse, but it can be uncomfortable at the time, and so there is that risk, and it can bring on symptoms when one is overexerted and overheated. And another interesting point I wanted to bring up about the risks, and this can be a benefit too. Emotional releases can happen when practicing yoga, and partly maybe because it is so focused on breathing and connecting with the mind, body, spirit. I know that there are some people who've had emotional things happen while practicing yoga, and it can feel like a bad thing or an embarrassing thing, but I think it's a helpful thing, and it's part of the process of healing. But it is a bit of a risk. Yoga incorporates postures which stretch and strengthen muscles. They can be held statically without moving, or they could be moved through dynamically. Sun salutations are an example of more dynamic movement. So they could be considered cardiovascular endurance, especially if done more quickly. So they're quicker movements coordinated with the breath. Yoga also incorporates breathing exercises, guided relaxations, meditations, and visualizations. And yoga can be done in the desert in Nevada. And so I'd like to discuss the literature which I found that supports yoga and MS. There's two in particular that I'll be discussing. The first one is a randomized control trial of yoga and exercise in multiple sclerosis. It's in the Journal of Neurology from 2004. The objective was to determine the effect of yoga and aerobic exercise on cognitive function, fatigue, mood, and quality of life in multiple sclerosis. They had a lot of subjects, a significant number of subjects, 69, and people were randomized into one of three groups for 6 months. One was a weekly Iyengar yoga class with a home practice. One was a weekly exercise class. They used a stationary bike. They did some stretching, and they were given a home exercise program. And the third group was a waitlist group, so they weren't doing any kind of active treatment. They concluded that subjects with MS participating in either a 6-month yoga class or exercise class showed significant improvement in measures of fatigue, and there was no change in cognitive function noted in this study. So I tend to say it's better to choose something you enjoy, and something is better than nothing. So choose a form of exercise, and if it's yoga, that's wonderful. If it's something else or both, that's wonderful too. Some interesting points from that particular article. There were 1,980 survey responders with MS, and 30% had taken yoga classes. Of these, 50% reported it was very beneficial, and this compared favorably to the very beneficial ratings for the therapeutic drugs they were taking for MS. Other interesting points that were brought up: exercise or yoga may improve cognitive ability in MS by improving mood and reducing stress. Hatha yoga has been reported to produce improvements in mood comparable to aerobic exercise. Yoga requires attention to breath and body parts, and the writers wondered if this kind of attention would help improve actual cognitive attention function. The next study I'll be discussing is called The Effects of Yoga Intervention on Fatigue, a meta-analysis. This was done in 2012, so quite recently, and it's from the Evidence-Based Complementary Alternative Medicine Journal. They looked at 19 clinical studies. Participants in the studies had cancer, MS, dialysis, pancreatitis, fibromyalgia, asthma. They also had some healthy subjects. They found a small positive effect on fatigue, and they found that yoga is safe and it's effective to attenuate other health-related symptoms. The treatment effect of yoga could be improved, they found, with better designed studies. So the design of the studies were a problem. And they found also that the quality of evidence could be better. They also thought that yoga is one of the best known and frequently used body-mind interventions. Interestingly, they also looked at meditation programs, and they were shown to increase mood and sleep quality and reduce stress and fatigue in cancer patients. Both of these articles, if any of you are interested, they're actually available in full text for free online. So I now will talk about definitions. So in yoga and in a yoga class or yoga video, DVD, you might hear the teacher speak in Sanskrit, which is an ancient Indian language, and a lot of times, even in our Western world, a lot of yoga teachers are using these words. So I want to just go through a few that I thought might be nice to explain, and then you can always refer back to it and know what they are. But it also helps explain some things about yoga looking at these words, especially the first one. And they have literal translations as well as just what they're referring to. So asana is a specific sequence of postures. It can include forward bends, back bends, balance poses, sun salutations, inversions, which are head down positions, spinal twists, side bends, and they also are done in standing, seated, lying down, and there's also another group of poses, hip openers. So that is the translation of asana, but the literal translation of asana means to sit down, and it's the mastery of sitting still, the place where a practitioner sits and the posture in which he sits in. So that's very interesting because that is a little bit the philosophy behind yoga, is to do all the asana, the postures and the practice, to be able to eventually sit in quiet meditation comfortably with good posture. And not every school of yoga has this as their main goal, but it is an interesting definition of asana. And another definition, pranayama. We'll be doing a pranayama today. It means breathing techniques and moving of life energy force. Dhyana is mental concentration or meditation. Shavasana is corpse pose or final relaxation. And so at the end of a class, usually a class will end in Shavasana, and it's lying on the back, and it's thought to be a small death and rebirth done at the end of the class. So when you wake from Shavasana, it's like a rebirth and you're re-energized for life. Vinyasa is dynamic movement with breath. It's flowing movement. It's like a moving meditation. And the literal translation is to place in a special way. Namaste is a greeting in Hindi, and so in India it's said all the time as a greeting. In a yoga class, it's often the way a teacher will end a class, and they will say namaste, and then the students will say namaste, and that means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. Om is the universal sound, so a lot of teachers will use some chanting in their classes, and so you might start with chanting Om together in a class, and that is thought to help tune the class and tune people's energy together. So these are my drawings, and there are so many ways to lie down and rest. I saw a very funny t-shirt that says, "I'm just here for Shavasana," and I've had students say that to me, some days more than others. So there's so many ways just to place your body in a comfortable lying down position. The bottom right is an example of just Shavasana by itself, and then a supported Shavasana beside it with a bolster under the knees, and then a pillow or rolled towel under the neck. And then there's other ways that sometimes classes are ended in these other relaxing poses, legs up the wall or butterfly, knees are open, and I have the green splotches are meant to be pillows or some support under the knees. The next thing we'll talk about is styles of yoga, and there are so many different styles when you start to look into what types of class you would like to take if you're new. And for those of you who already practice, you may already have looked into this a little bit and know about all the styles. So I want to try and untangle the different names and the different styles for you, so you know a little bit more what you're looking at. So Hatha yoga is a very common name for, my yoga teacher trainer calls Hatha an umbrella term for many types of yoga. It is a blend of breathing, held postures, and quiet reflection, often recommended for beginners. Sometimes Hatha can be more on the static side than dynamic, but a lot of times teachers will mix different kinds of styles anyways. And what I did want to say about the styles of yoga, just going back a step, is that every teacher has their own interpretation of the style that they teach and make it their own. So these are just guidelines that I'm telling you, and it's really important to speak to the teacher or take the class to find out more about what that particular class is about. So this is just a guideline. Iyengar yoga, that was one of the names I brought up in one of the studies that I spoke about. It tends to be more static or held postures. There's a lot of thought taken into how you get into the posture, so it's a little bit slower paced. Poses may be held for longer, and the focus is on alignment and posture. There is use of props in Iyengar, so lots of straps, bolsters, blocks, chairs, and it's also a type of yoga that can be recommended for all individuals, including the elderly. Again, this is just a guideline, so some Iyengar classes can also be quite vigorous too. Hot yoga is yoga done in a heated room. Bikram and moksha, or it might just say hot yoga. I tend to say to avoid these in MS because a lot of people have heat sensitivity and it makes their symptoms worse. So I would tend to say, if that's you, then I would suggest avoiding the hot yoga classes. Anusura is a type of yoga created by John Friend, who's American, so it's a modern type of hatha. The poses are it's very alignment focused and more thematic. So there's always a theme at the beginning of the class that you might be working with. And the actual translation of Anusura is flowing with grace. And it's less focused on the meditative side. So it's one of those ones I don't think the main idea is to be able to sit in a seated posture for meditation. It's kind of yoga for yoga's sake and the beauty of yoga. Vinyasa I spoke about a little bit. It is, as I said, coordinated breath performed with movement. It's a little bit more physically active. Sun salutations are an example of vinyasa, where you do one movement per breath. It's more flowing. Power and Ashtanga yoga are physically more vigorous and demanding, and so they're more powerful versions of vinyasa, not recommended for a first timer or a beginner, unless you're really physically fit and depending on your level, but in general not. Yin yoga is really focused on stretching, and it's quite the yin classes that I have gone to myself were quite vigorous stretching, held for very long periods of time. I tend to not recommend yin classes for MS because I think that type of vigorous and slightly painful stretching can increase spasticity and can more likely cause injury. But that again is just my opinion, and I think there are some really good yin teachers out there who would have a sensitivity and know how to make the class more therapeutic for people. So that's just my opinion. Yin and yang, I've seen that lately, and that is a combination of the prolonged held stretching with a more heated practice, so combining it with maybe some vinyasa style moves. Restorative yoga has a focus on relaxation. It's gentle and therapeutic. There's use of props to support the body, and it really tends to be a very passive class, so it's not as active, but it depends on people's goal. If someone's having a bad day, or if someone wants to more work on relaxation and sleep, anxiety, those kind of things, or restorative, and other things as well. Restorative classes are great. And then you might see other names like adapted yoga, chair yoga, seniors yoga, gentle yoga. Yoga Lattes I've taken, which is yoga combined with Pilates. So what type of yoga to choose? As you can see, there are many styles of yoga and types. And finding the right style and level is very important. Finding a class that is adapted for people with disabilities is essential if you have mobility issues or problems with other MS symptoms like fatigue, pain, spasticity. As many yoga classes can be quite a lot more vigorous and don't always allow for modifications. A class that can meet your special needs. A class that can meet your special needs and allow you to work at your own pace. I'm getting a call through right now, so I hope it's not causing a problem with the presentation.
I can't hear anything. It just cut out for a second, but you're okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. So finding a class that is adapted to people with disabilities is essential, as many yoga classes are vigorous and don't allow for modifications. So again, I don't know if you heard me say that already, but if you have some limitations on mobility or some symptoms of MS, that's important. A class that can meet your special needs and allow you to work at your own pace. Find a yoga teacher that has experience with MS and understands the condition and contraindications. This isn't always possible, so you might be the teacher to your teacher about what your needs are and about MS, perhaps. Always listen to your body in a yoga class and your needs first and foremost, and go at your own pace. Take breaks as often as you need. So there's lots of resting poses, child's pose, a simple seated forward bend. It's important to always take care of your body. So if you need a rest, you can always move into a resting pose and let your teacher know that. Some MS-specific concerns and yoga. So things to perhaps, if you're just starting, that you might want to ask your teacher or the potential yoga center. You can ask some of these questions or things to think about. Use of supports. So whether or not there are devices there like chairs, there's always walls available, usually bolsters. I actually, in my adapted yoga class, had extra helpers, so assistants to help with people if needed. You may be able to also bring in a support partner to help with setup as needed. Some people need a second pair of hands to help them down to the floor or safely into positions, or even help move limbs. You can ask if the class accommodates for people in wheelchairs. I've had people do a whole entire classes in a wheelchair, and you can adapt the poses. Often I'll put a chair in front and still use blocks and other props. Another thing I like to bring up is thinking about neck flexion, so bringing down the chin to the chest. A lot of people with MS have a Hermetz phenomenon, where with that movement there can be a painful shock feeling down the spine. And so I tend to avoid this when teaching an MS yoga class, and you might need to inform your teacher that you want to avoid that. Again, it's not going to make your MS worse, but it can be uncomfortable and is uncomfortable. Ask about the style used for stretching poses in particular. I tend to recommend a slow and sustained stretch without being too vigorous, but going into a gentle pull without bouncing is best for spasticity. Using pillows or props can help ease into a stretch, which help when there's spasticity. Ask about the length of time that poses are held for. In my adapted yoga classes, I used to tend to just hold poses for 3 to 5 breaths maximum. And sometimes teachers hold poses a bit longer, and that can be hard if people have fatigue or other weakness, other symptoms. So that's a good question to ask. Whether they use a static style or a dynamic style or combination of both. You might want to also ask about class size. Sometimes if you have a lot of needs, it might be nicer to have a smaller class size. Heat management with yoga. So as I said, avoiding hot yoga is the first way, and checking out the yoga center or the place that you'll be going to. Do they have air conditioning? Is there a fan that you can set in front of you if you're particularly heat sensitive when exercising? Maybe you can bring your own fan in and sit near a plug and just plug it in. You can bring cooling devices like those vests and scarves and hats with you to the class. I had a participant in my class who would always bring her ice water spray bottle and just spritz herself during the class, and that seemed to work for her. And then when you think about the yoga practice itself, there are cooling versus heating poses that can be done. So hatha is actually also a balance between cooling and heating. So balance poses and forward bends like child's pose or just leaning forward, forward folding in a chair, they're all cooling. Sun salutations and back bends are more heating poses. So in the summertime, on a hot day, I'll tend to actually make a more cooling class rather than do a lot of heating postures. And even the pranayama, the breathing techniques, there are cooling breaths that are more cooling and breath techniques that are more heating. For example, sitali is one where you make a loop with your tongue. Not everyone can do that, so you can also purse your lips and just breathe in and out through your mouth, through that tongue or through your pursed lips, and that's considered a cooling breath. Kapalabhati is forced exhalations. They're done very, very quickly, and it's a vigorous breathing technique, and that's more of a heating practice. Spasticity management with yoga. So we talked about stretching, and another spinal twists are actually, I think, have a positive effect on spasticity. And so this is an example in this picture. It's actually a picture of one of my classes, and it's a seated twist, so people are just sitting in a chair and doing a spinal twist. And then that's me on a mountaintop, and that's another twist, and it's more of an active pose, and there's some stretching and opposing strengthening going on there too. So lots of ways you can twist. And here are some more tips on how to help you choose a class. Generally, if you can walk without assistance, then you might be able to go to a regular yoga class. Consider again your fall history and whether you're at risk for falls and other symptoms. You may also decide to try both, like try a regular class and try a more adapted class, and then on a good day you might have a more vigorous class that you go to, and on a bad day have a more specialized class to go to that is gentler or restorative. Oh, I think I didn't talk. Okay, and then places to try yoga. You might try a yoga studio, a community center, a health club, or a gym. Choosing among many options continued. There may be special MS classes in your area. It's always good to choose something closer to home. This picture here is an example of an adapted kind of yoga class, and there is a caregiver here with this participant, and she's helped him down to the floor from the wheelchair into a 4-point position over the ball, and is helping position his hands and helping him a little bit with balance. So that's an example of how going to a yoga class and bringing a support partner might work. How to start and continue a practice. To start with, perhaps do some research and find a class that might be appropriate, and actually this webinar is a great first step. Speak to the teacher about your own needs. If the idea of a first group class is daunting, consider working one-on-one with a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist and building up to a class. Not everyone's a class person as well, so you might decide to work from home and do a DVD or work from a book or YouTube. Try one class or try a few different teachers and class types to find a connection and see if you like it. And try perhaps going once a week if possible. Anything is better than nothing. You can build up from there, and perhaps one time a week along with other forms of exercise on other days, or you might choose to do 2 to 3 times a week or even a daily practice. The options are endless depending on your needs and level of ability. You might do a class every 2 weeks along with starting a home-based practice. You might also, as I said, I said this a little bit early, that there's DVDs and yoga books that you could try to work with at home on your own or with a family member there helping. WeFit also has yoga options, and you can just find a method that works for you and stick with it. There's many ways that you can access yoga. In my adapted yoga classes, just to give you an example, some people started with one class a week and then found that they wanted to increase and found another adapted class, so they were doing 2 a week. And sometimes we would both be on vacation or it would be holidays, and they wanted to continue their practice. And so they got together, and it was a group of 3 of them, and I think they were working in one of the ladies' condo. She had an exercise room there, so they would meet once a week and do a home-based practice with a DVD, and I think it's one of the ones that I give you on the resource sheet. And then they would meet after for a coffee or tea date and also have social time. You may eventually decide, and this might sound lofty to you right now, but you might decide to find a yoga teacher training or yoga therapy training course yourself and offer specialized classes in your area. It all starts with one experience. And I just want to say about that, you don't have to have a very advanced practice to be able to teach. In fact, having your own body limitations may make you a better teacher in helping others with similar needs. The options are really endless, so just pick something you enjoy that you will stick to. So here's that resource sheet, and you can look through it there. I actually just found out the National MS Society is a great resource, and they, in Arizona, I think there is a therapist who's a physical therapist who's also a yoga teacher who's offering courses for yoga teachers how to teach yoga to people with MS. So that was really interesting. And there's a bunch of resources for you to help you. So I'd like to end with a short practice. The topic of yoga can be very intellectualized. There's books written about it. I just presented a presentation about it. But the best way to experience yoga is through practice. So we'll just do a simple breath work, a pranayama. I'd like to teach you a full, complete yogic breath. So let's sit wherever you are. You can, if you're sitting, you can make sure your feet are comfortably on the floor, and you can just make sure you're in a comfortable position. your spine tall. Let's place one hand on the lower belly and one hand on the upper chest in the center. And connect to your breath for a moment. If you have trouble putting your hands in those areas, you can just bring your mind's eye to those parts of your body and just feel which one's moving more. Take note of that. Then place both your hands on your lower belly, and we'll inhale and exhale through the nose. And we'll do a belly breath I'll teach, and then I'll teach a middle chest breath, and then I'll teach an upper chest breath, and then we'll put all three together into a complete yogic breath. So with both hands on the lower belly, inhale through your nose and expand your lower belly. Fill it up like a balloon. On the exhale through your nose, let the balloon deflate and the air come out, and your belly moves in towards your spine. Take 3 breaths like that. And then we'll place both hands, if you can place your hands on your middle chest, on your rib cage on the side. Again, you can do this with one hand, or you can just bring your mind's eye to that area of your body. And now we'll just expand the mid-chest. So when we breathe in, let the rib cage move up and out like 2 bucket handles. And then on the exhale, let the rib cage move down and in towards your center. Fill up your mid-chest completely and fully. Take 2 or 3 breaths like that in your own breath timing. And then we'll do an upper chest breath. So you can put your hands so that your fingertips are under your collarbones. You can do this with one hand, or just imagine, like bring your attention to this area. And then when you inhale, just lift your upper chest so your collarbones move up towards your chin. And then on the exhale, the upper chest moves down towards your feet. Take a few breaths like that. And now we'll put all 3 parts together. So you can, if you're finding your hands helpful, you can put one hand on your lower belly and one hand stays in the middle of your upper chest. So one hand's below the navel. And then on the inhale, we'll fill the lower belly first, then the mid-chest, then the upper chest. And on the exhale, let everything simultaneously relax and breathe out. Inhale into your lower belly, mid-chest, upper chest, and exhale everything out. We'll do one more. Inhale, lower belly, mid-chest, upper chest, and exhale. And then do one on your own. And then you can relax your breathing and place your hands down on your lap. And just notice inwardly how you're feeling, how your body's feeling at the moment. Also, you can give yourself a big pat on your back if this is your first time doing yoga, because you just did yoga practice. We did a pranayama together. And so that's great. And I just want to say that yoga is really fun. We've talked kind of academically about it, but I hope this inspires you to try a yoga class in your area or at home. And if you already do yoga, I hope that there was something that you could take home from this presentation as well. And remember that everyone can do yoga. And I'd like to open it up to questions now.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the breathing exercise as well. I was following along here. We did get some great questions from people, and we do have time to take a couple. The first one that I'm seeing here is, what should a home-based practice include? Do you have suggestions for someone practicing at home?
It's really hard for me to make any suggestions without knowing a person and their physical needs and what's going on for them. So that's a really hard question to answer specifically. But I think that it would, if your situation is that you have very little physical limitations, you might be able to look at something on, look at some of the DVDs or get one of the books that I've recommended. There's one, Yoga and MS, that you might be able to pick some things out of. But if you really haven't done yoga before, I think the best thing is to go to a yoga teacher that does private work or a yoga therapist and have an assessment, and then they can develop a practice for you. But a lot of people do, I think it just depends on people's level of ability too. I think if you have more limitations, or you're someone who's using a wheelchair or someone who uses a walking aid, definitely going to get one-on-one help to develop your own program and a safe program for you is what I'd recommend. If you're pretty high functioning, you might be able to use some of the resources, try some of the DVDs that I've recommended or research. There might be other ones out there too, and then you can work from that. There's the Wii Fit and YouTube I've used myself to look things up for yoga, and they do some pretty good demonstrations. But again, you want to make sure you're safe. So I think if safety is in question, the best thing is to get someone to help you. And it doesn't have to be very expensive. You can contact the MS Society, and there's an MS navigator that can help you find someone who does this locally in your area. And it could be just a few sessions one-on-one, and then you might be able to develop a program and then just work away on your own. So it's hard to answer that question, as I said, without knowing exactly your situation. But always safety is a very important thing to keep in mind for that.
Great. Another question I have, I guess this is an individual that maybe had issues with the breathing portion of a yoga class that they took. They're wondering if yoga can be done without the guided breathing, just concentrating on movements, or is that not suggested, or is that a possibility?
That's a very good question. I would like to say, and I left something. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I left this out, I think, because I realized my timing I was taking longer than I thought. But with breathing and with yoga, I don't think there's any way that you could be doing something really, really wrong if you're trying and your intention is to try. So I think that, breathing is a big part of yoga, and I think breathing is, for some people, very frustrating to get the breathing. But to be very easy on yourself and kind to yourself, it's not about getting it right. It's about having the intention to try. And if your intention is there, that you're not able to follow exactly what the teacher's saying, or you're feeling that you're doing, you shouldn't ever feel like you're doing it wrong, because you're trying, and so you're doing the best that you can do. And you're trying to follow the breathing. Sometimes you're there, sometimes you're not, and everything you're doing is absolutely okay. That's what I think about that.
Great. Thanks for your answer. Another one I have here is it ever okay to practice yoga during a flare-up?
Well, I think that's another really good question. Maybe that's where you revert to what I said about on a bad day. You know, if you're having a bad day or you're having a flare-up, you know, you probably want to discuss it with your health care providers. You know, maybe you need some extra support. It is good to rest in an MS exacerbation. And if you feel up to doing something and you really want to be doing something but you don't know what to be doing, maybe that's where you try something more restorative where it's not an active thing, or something like restorative poses, the breathing techniques, the relaxation, the meditation. If you feel up for it, those are okay to try, I think. But I would stay away from, if you're having a bad day, you know, I think in the CAN-DO programs they say if you're having a really bad day, you still might try to do the exercise that your goal is to do, but if after a short while you're feeling worse, or it's feeling worse than what you started, or it's not going well, then it's good to stop and take a rest. So rest is a really important and overlooked part of healing. So I think if you're having an exacerbation, rest is really the thing to do. And if you need to do something, do a gentle restorative practice, or just breath work, or just meditation.
Great. Another question I have is, and this may be a subjective question, but what types of yoga would be best for someone who is just starting? I've actually gotten this from a couple of people, and one individual is newly diagnosed as well.
Mm-hmm. Who's just starting yoga, or starting?
Or wanting to start yoga. What particular, I guess, practices would you suggest?
Okay, so it's so hard to say without knowing exactly, again, what your particular concerns are and what your level of mobility is and physical ability. But if it's your first time, if it's anyone's first time to yoga, I would definitely, you know, some of the gentler classes, classes that are beginner classes, the Hatha or the Iyengar are usually a good class to start with, versus, say, I mentioned the Ashtanga or Vinyasa might be a more vigorous class. So, but it's also important to speak to the teachers and read about the class and see what it is, if it is for beginners. Often they'll say beginners, intermediate, and then also you need to kind of look at your situation and decide if you think you need an MS-specific class or an adapted class or a gentler class. So it's very, it's hard to answer that for you without knowing you, but I hope that helps.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. I've had a few people ask about equipment and class cost. Do you feel that this is something that someone could start that is maybe on a limited budget? I guess the affordability of yoga.
Yes, like to start taking the class on a limited budget, you mean?
Yeah, and I guess just also equipment needs too.
Mm-hmm. Well, a home practice or getting one of the yoga DVDs and working with that is very low cost. And then, like, usually things that you would need, you might have around you. There's always household items that you can kind of use that you don't. If money's an issue, you don't have to buy the expensive yoga blocks. You might have a wooden block or something. Like, you can always use household items, or instead of buying a special yoga strap that might be more costly, you can use a belt or something like a towel or a belt from a a leather belt or a belt from a robe or something. There's lots of things that you can lower your cost. And then I know like there are also if you want to go out to a class and money's an issue, yoga can be very expensive, and that is an obstacle. But my class that I offered in Vancouver, I specifically offered at a very low cost, and I think that there are classes maybe through the National MS Society would be a great resource to find subsidized yoga classes. The one I taught, the community center, subsidized it, so I think it ended up being like $6 per person for an hour-and-a-half class, which is very low and a lot of the time not heard of. But I think there are classes like that throughout North America, that are more done for people who we know don't have money. So hopefully money will not be too much of a limitation, and that everyone can find something that is lower cost. Even yoga studios, like in any new city, when I've gone to a city, there's always yoga studios that one day a week might have like a karma yoga class and do yoga by donation, and they might donate the money to a charity. And yoga it tends to be one of those things that there tends to be a lot of things like that being done. So I think if you look for it, you can find it, and you can find and there's also places to apply for funding. Like I know, other than that adapted yoga class, I also taught a rehab yoga class, which was a little bit different, and it was a little more costly. I was running it more as a yoga therapist, physiotherapist, and a smaller group of people in the class. And there was someone that wanted to join that couldn't afford it, and he actually was able to apply to one of the charities for a grant, and they completely funded the class for him. So the National MS Society and the MS Society of Canada would be a great resource if you find a class in your area that's appropriate and you just can't afford it. You might be able to access funding. So keep speaking to your local chapters of the National MS Society and the MS Society of Canada and other ones too that might exist.
Oh, great. I'm actually going to sneak one more question in. Sorry.
Okay.
I've had a few people ask about the certification process for instructors. Is there someone looking for a class? How should they determine if the instructor is certified or if it's, if they're qualified to teach MS? What's the best way for them to find that information?
Well, there is no certification process for being certified to teach a class to people with MS at the moment, I believe. There is a Yoga Therapy Association, but I don't know what their certification. I don't know that much about their certification process, but you can get information from, like usually on a website or on a flyer, it'll say, if a yoga teacher is registered, it will say RYT, which is Registered Yoga Teacher. And then finding out about the MS specific stuff, I know the Yoga Jungle part of the National MS Society website, they have listings of people who have a special interest in MS or have experience with that. But so you can research it and look online. You can also Google their name and see, what their training is, what their interests are. They might say right in their blurb that they specialize in it. But if you can't find that information, you can always call or go in person and just ask about their training. There's no standards really for that, but it's always you always want to see RYT, which means Registered Yoga Teacher, and then it might say 200, they might have taken the 200 hours, or there's a 500 hour, it's more advanced. Iyengar trained teachers have a much more, that's probably partly why sometimes people recommend Iyengar to people with MS, because the yoga teachers have a much more, I think the training is much more in-depth, and it's not like 200 hours. It's like over years. I think it takes a much longer time to get certified in Iyengar yoga teacher, as an Iyengar yoga teacher. So they have a little bit more in-depth knowledge. And then always you can find, there's a lot of yoga teachers who are also physical therapists or also massage therapists or also osteopaths or other areas. They have other certifications, and usually they'll say that right there with their name because they want that to be known. So I hope that's helpful in finding that information.
No, that's great, and thank you for taking that one as well.
No
thank you for tonight's presentation, for the Q&A, and I just also want to thank all the participants who joined us this evening. We've had some great questions this evening. And just to share with you, the next monthly webinar is on November the 13th, and that's at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And the topic is going to be talking to your employer. And our special presenters that evening will be Barbara McCann and Stephen Neeson. Both are employment experts with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. So please join us for that. And we are also offering 2 special Live Fully, Live Well webinars this fall. And this is in conjunction with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. And this is a wellness program for people with MS and their support partners. So please join us on Tuesday, October the 16th on the topic of fatigue. And we'll have another one on Tuesday, November the 20th, and that will be a webinar on mobility. And finally this evening, I just want to share a special incentive for those of you who continue to join us live for the webinars. We're offering a prize for one lucky winner who joins us live for 3 of the 5 webinars between now and December. And this does include tonight's webinar, which was on yoga and MS. And the prize is a copy of our new book, The Can-Do Multiple Sclerosis Guide to Lifestyle Empowerment. And this book was co-authored by several Can-Do MS program consultants, and it was edited by Pat Kennedy. And Pat is a registered nurse and nurse practitioner who is our nurse educator and a longtime programs consultant for our Can-Do MS staff. So please join Can-Do MS for our monthly webinar series or for our special Live Fully, Live Well webinars. And we'll pick one individual at random, and the book winner will be announced and contacted on Monday, December 17th, and this will be by email or a phone call. So good luck to everyone, and again, thanks for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you on the registration list in the future. And if you'd like to see reviews or purchase a copy of the book online, visit our website, which is mscando.org, and there's more info on the book, which is listed under the Programs tab. And you can also register for the Can-Do MS webinars and find our archived webinars under that same Programs tab. And if you participated live tonight, once the presentation is over, you will see a survey appear on your computer screen. Please take a moment to complete the survey and help us continue to improve our webinars. We value everyone's feedback and input, and you will also receive a copy of tonight's webinar slides by email. And we'll also send a copy of the list of resources too. So thanks everyone, and have a great night.